They celebrated my sister's birthday the same week my husband was buried. That's when I knew I didn't belong. The scent of frosting and synthetic vanilla air freshener hit me before I even stepped into the living room. My heels sank slightly into the rug someone had vacuumed. Balloons were tied to the stair railings, cheap foil ones that read, "You go girl and birthday queen." I stood frozen in the doorway, holding the funeral program like a second skin. No one noticed. Jessica turned to me already, mid-laugh, her champagne glass tilted back like it belonged there. "Oh, you made it," she said, wiping lipstick from her teeth. "We weren't sure if you'd come." I didn't answer. The silence pressed around me like a second funeral. Mom Margot rushed over with her arms outstretched, too rehearsed to be sincere. "Sweetheart, I know it's been hard, but we had this plan before Thomas passed. And Jessica's only 35 once. 35! The same number of days Thomas had spent in the hospital. The irony tasted bitter in my mouth. Dad didn't even look at me. He sat near the fireplace legs, crossed like he was presiding over a board meeting, not his daughter's emotional collapse. He held a small gift box wrapped in gold. "Jessica, he said your condo paperwork's done. You can pick up the keys. Monday. Happy birthday, baby." The sound of the bow unraveling felt louder than my own pulse. Jessica squealed, flung her arms around him, and I watched from the corner, clenching the folded paper in my coat pocket. No one asked how I was doing. No one even glanced at the black dress I hadn't changed out of. I looked around, no sign of Sophie. At least my daughter had more sense than I did. I lingered near the dessert table, which was covered in frosted cupcakes and that garish cake with pink roses piped too perfectly. I thought about how many times Thomas had asked me to keep the peace, how many times I'd swallowed my voice for moments just like this. "I thought we were going to do something quiet," I muttered to Margot. She shrugged. "We didn't want to cancel. It's already been, 10 days? Life goes on, Elise." I nodded more to myself than to her. My fingers brushed the corner of a paper plate, but I didn't take one. "You can't grieve forever," Jessica had said once, waving off my tears. I should have listened closer. Maybe she wasn't dismissing me. Maybe she was warning me. I slipped out when no one was looking. The laughter inside muffled by the door as it clicked shut behind me. Outside, the cold slapped me hard across the face. I walked to my car, fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, not from the chill. There was a folded note under my windshield wiper. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Celeste. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. I opened the note and read in her loopy script, "Don't let their silence erase you." Tears blurred the ink, but I didn't wipe them away. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there, letting the engine hum beneath me. The house behind me glowed like a stage set. Fake, carefully lit. Only believable from far enough away. I opened my phone. I hadn't been able to listen to Thomas's last message before, but my thumb hovered over it now. 1 second, 2, then I tapped play. His voice, hoarse, softer than I remembered, came through. "If they push you, don't flinch." That was all. No goodbye. No, I love you. Just that. And suddenly, I didn't want their cake, or their apologies, or their carefully timed grief. The birthday candle smoke still lingers in the air as I drive away. Something inside me begins to shift. When someone says you're strong, what they mean is, we won't help you. The words echoed in my mind as I sat in my home office, surrounded by everything Thomas had touched. His worn cardigan still hung on the back of the chair. The curtains we picked out 3 years ago swayed slightly with the breeze. It all felt too still, like grief had taken up permanent residence. The note from Celeste lay beside my keyboard. "Don't let their silence erase you." I picked it up again, ran my fingers over the ink, and then gently crumpled it. I had been strong long enough. Strong when they told me to be there for Sophie. Strong when Margot suggested I try not to dwell. Strong when Richard handed Jessica a condo and asked me to sign over Thomas's estate, all in the same breath. A knock on the door snapped me out of the spiral. I didn't expect anyone. Celeste didn't wait for permission. She pushed the door open, holding a steaming container of soup and a paper bag. You haven't eaten, have you? She asked, her voice too gentle to fight. I managed a half smile. You always did have timing. She set the soup down and pulled up a chair. You won't believe what I remembered last night, she said. Do you recall your college interview with Berkeley? I nodded slowly, unsure where she was going. Well, apparently, Jessica called the office pretending to be you and canceled it. The secretary told her they'd try to reschedule, but they never did. I stared at her jaw slack. She bragged about it to Leah once Celeste added. Said it was the only way she could guarantee you stayed local. You were her shadow, and she wanted to keep it that way. My stomach turned. Suddenly, even the soup smelled sour. That was 2 decades ago, I said. And she's still doing it, Celeste replied, folding her arms. Only now, instead of college interviews, it's estates and trust funds. I opened the drawer and took out the estate file. The calendar on the wall had a red circle around the words, estate filing deadline. Beneath it, a yellow sticky note read, call Richard. Discuss trust language. I hadn't. He wants me to sign everything over to the family trust, I said. Said it would be less messy. Celeste's eyebrows rose. Messy, for whom I didn't answer. I just stared at the folder, willing it to speak for me. My phone buzzed. A message from Leah. She had sent a photo, an old faded envelope with Thomas's initials on the flap. Found this in Aunt Nora's keepsake box. Thought you should see it, the caption read. Why would Thomas send something to your aunt? I murmured. Celeste peered at the screen. Because he didn't trust your family. Maybe he knew. The doorbell rang again, but I ignored it. My mind had already shifted. I scanned the room. Where would Thomas have put something? I moved to the bookshelf and traced the edge of our wedding photo. Something felt off. I lifted the frame. Taped to the back, hidden behind the cardboard backing, was a slim legal envelope. Private. In case of dispute. The handwriting was unmistakably his. I sat down hard, the envelope trembling in my hands. Are you going to open it? Celeste asked softly. I looked at her, then at the envelope and shook my head. Not yet. I needed answers first. I dialed Leah. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, everything okay? Did you know Thomas kept backups? I asked. Off the record ones. The line went quiet. They asked me to attend a casual discussion. I left with a pen in my hand and betrayal in my blood. The invitation came by voicemail. Richard's tone warm with a performative kind of concern. Just a little check-in, sweetheart. No pressure. Thought we'd catch up over coffee. Talk through a few things. I should have known. Nothing in this family was ever just anything. The Caldwell estate parlor looked like it had been staged for a magazine spread. Afternoon light spilled through tall windows, making the gold trim on the drapes glow. There were matching coffee cups, an untouched fruit tart, and a stack of papers perfectly aligned on the marble coffee table. Jessica looked up from her seat, already sipping tea. You made it, she said. No hug, no smile, just that thin, polished voice. Margot patted the cushion beside her. We thought you could use some closure, darling. Closure. Richard gestured to the armchair across from them. Sit, Elise. Let's be civil. I sat slowly, my eyes drifting to the papers. Jessica didn't wait, so she said. Pushing one folder forward, we were hoping you'd consider signing over the lake cabin. I mean, you're in the city now. It just makes sense for someone else to keep it up. I stared at her. Someone like you. She blinked innocent. Well, I've always loved it up there, Margot added. It's not like it's your primary residence. Besides, it was part of your wedding assets, technically. And now, that... Her voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Now that Thomas was gone, I swallowed hard, my gaze fixed on the blue legal folder. The title read, Property Transfer Authorization. Elise C. Reeves. You went to a lawyer, I asked quietly. Richard chuckled, sipping his espresso. It's just paperwork, Elise. Streamlining things. No one wants probate messes hanging over the holidays. Jessica leaned in. You know how these things drag out. We're just trying to help. I laughed under my breath. Help. Their faces tightened. You didn't even come to the funeral? I said, my voice suddenly sharp. Margot's lips thinned. We didn't want to make a scene. A scene I repeated. Thomas loved this family, even when it didn't deserve it. Richard shrugged. Life moves on, Elise. It's what he would have wanted. My phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced at it. A message from Leah. They're trying this again. Remember 2016 I did. The fight over Grandpa's land. The guilt tripping. The signatures under pressure. I remembered sitting in this same room, pen in hand, watching Jessica smile like she'd won. Why now? I asked. Why the sudden interest in the cabin? Jessica's smile faltered just a bit. It's just a practical matter. No one's pushing you. Really, I said. Because this, I tapped the folder, feels a lot like pressure. Silence. And then Margot's voice cold and clipped. You're being ungrateful. I looked at her. At all of them. Richard set his cup down with finality. We gave you everything. A stable upbringing. Your college tuition. Thomas wouldn't even have made partner if I hadn't made that call. I stood up. You didn't give me Thomas, I said, and you sure as hell don't get to take what he left behind. I didn't take the folder. I didn't drink the coffee. I left the room with my spine straight and my hands shaking. Once I was outside, I exhaled the crisp air burning in my lungs. My fingers fumbled for my phone. Danica answered on the second ring. I think it's time we talk options. I opened Sophie's bedroom door. It wasn't the silence that broke me. It was what had been taken. The soft scent of her shampoo still lingered in the air, but her room no longer felt like hers. Or mine. The photo of Thomas that used to sit on her nightstand, gone. The quilt I'd sewn during my pregnancy, replaced by a prepackaged hotel-like comforter. Sophie's bookshelf, once filled with bedtime stories and drawings, now housed neatly folded towels and a new overnight bag. It felt staged, sanitized. Like someone had decided my daughter's memories were no longer necessary. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, not trusting my breath. When Sophie walked in fresh from a weekend at my parents', she looked right past the empty nightstand. Where's your photo with Dad? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged, unzipping her backpack. Grandpa said you didn't need those things anymore. He said it was time to start new memories. I stared at her, stunned. Did you agree with that? She hesitated, avoiding my eyes. He said you'd understand. I didn't. Not even close. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. In the kitchen, my phone buzzed a call from Celeste. You're not crazy, she said before I could speak. Margot called me. She asked if I thought Sophie would benefit from structure. Like boarding school. She's not subtle. The words landed like stones in my stomach. She's calling around, I asked. She phrased it like concern. Said you were overwhelmed that maybe Sophie needed stability. Rage pulsed through me. Not for the first time, but this time it didn't come with helplessness. I was beginning to see their pattern, and I wasn't going to let them write me out. I opened my email. There, as if summoned by dread, was a new message from Danica, subject urgent. Guardianship filing, preliminary, notice. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked. Elise, I just received an alert. Richard and Margot have submitted an intent to request joint guardianship over Sophie. It's informal at this stage, but we need to be proactive. I read the lines again slower, as if the words would change on the second pass. They didn't. That evening, after Sophie went to bed, I quietly opened her backpack to pull out her school folder. And there it was. A folded sheet of thick paper, drafted in formal tone with clearly adult phrasing. The ink was slightly smudged, like someone had dictated the lines and asked her to copy them in her handwriting. I think I should live with Grandma more because Mom is tired and sad. She cries a lot. I want her to rest. A lump formed in my throat, heavy and sharp. That wasn't her voice. That was a script. I placed the letter back, careful not to wrinkle it. I didn't want Sophie to feel my intrusion, but I needed to know how far they were willing to go. In silence, I made my way to the garage. I hadn't been in there much since Thomas died. Dust coated his workbench, and the smell of motor oil and cedar filled the air. I found the old army box beneath a pile of garden gloves and unopened paint cans. It was locked, but I knew where the key was taped beneath his winter boots. Hands steady now, I turned the key and opened it. My husband was gone, but his secrets were waiting in a drawer only I knew to open. I had passed by it dozens of times in the last few weeks, sometimes brushing it with my fingertips, other times ignoring it altogether. It was part of the oak cabinet Thomas had built into the wall of my home office. A drawer, I once joked, was where secrets go to hide. Thomas had installed it with a hidden lock flush with the grain. He said it was for just-in-case things. We never talked more about it. Until now. The envelope from the frame still sat on my desk. I hadn't touched it since I found it, but tonight the room felt too quiet to ignore. I turned off the overhead light, letting the desk lamp cast its soft pool of gold. Thomas's playlist hummed low in the background, Satie's Gymnopédie, bleeding gently through the silence. It made the air feel weightless and heavy all at once. I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 things: a USB drive labeled "For Elise," a folded sheet of paper in Thomas's handwriting, and a slim legal document marked "Draft," not "Filed." My breath caught as I unfolded the handwritten note. Elise, if you're reading this, it means the worst happened. And if the worst happened, I need you to know something. I never trusted them, not with money and not with you. I saw the way Richard looked at the cabin, the way Jessica made snide comments when you weren't around. I didn't speak up enough. I'm sorry for that. This USB has everything I could gather: bank statements, old texts, one recording I made. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Love, T. I stared at the signature. He had signed it with just the letter like he always did on Post-it notes and grocery lists. I plugged in the USB. The folder structure loaded slowly. There were Excel files, screenshots, PDFs. But one item drew my eye: a file labeled Recording A1 Deck 2021. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Leah. Do you remember when I told you I thought Thomas was keeping a backup plan? I asked, barely able to control the tremor in my voice. There was a pause. You're not going to believe this, she said. I found a letter in my aunt's box. It was addressed to me. From Thomas. I never opened it because I assumed it was a holiday card. Postmarked late 2021. I sat down slowly. He really did plan for this. Looks like it, she said. I'll bring it over tomorrow. I didn't hang up right away. I just listened to her breathing on the line, steady, familiar grounding. After we ended the call, I reached for my phone and called Danica. This is bigger than I thought, I told her. Thomas left me a document. And a recording. Does it suggest manipulation? Coercion, anything that undermines their potential claims? She asked instantly, her legal instincts taking over. Yes, and an alternate will. There was silence on the other end. Elise, Danica said slowly, if you choose to use this, you need to prepare yourself. It's not just about proving fraud. It's about war. And wars don't leave people unchanged. I didn't respond right away. I walked to the window. The branches outside rustled against the glass like fingers scratching to be let in. Then let them come, I whispered. I turned back to the computer. My cursor hovered over the file name. On screen, recovered file. A1, December 2021 begins to play. His voice filled the room like he'd never left. But what he said changed everything. The coffee had gone cold, but I didn't move. Rain pressed soft fingers against the window, tapping out a rhythm, as if to coax me into courage. The file blinked on my laptop screen. Recovered file A1, December 2021. I took a breath and clicked play. A low hum. Then, Thomas's voice calm, measured slightly. Strained like he had rehearsed it, but still didn't want to say it out loud. If you're hearing this, he began. They've already started erasing you. I pressed a hand to my mouth. By now, I assume Richard and Jessica have gone after the cabin, maybe the trust. Maybe more. Elise listened to me. I tried stopping them in subtle ways. Changed titles, flagged transactions. But they're relentless. They treat family like a chessboard, and they think you don't know how to play. You do. He listed dates transfers from 2019-2020, then mentioned a bank I didn't recognize. There's a file in the drawer. Inside A, will the binder proof? And the part no one's seen yet. He paused. I overheard Richard telling Margot, We'll just fold it all into the family name. Elise will be too heartbroken to argue. My hand curled into a fist. I couldn't remember the last time anger felt this pure. I let the recording continue. They'll call you emotional, isolated, ungrateful. That's the strategy. If they strip your credibility, they can strip everything else. A sharp breath from him, and then, use what I've left you, but no, it won't be easy. If you use this, they'll come for your name, your daughter, your peace. I stared at the screen burning. Another line followed this time. Quieter, barely a murmur. Don't let grief keep you quiet. Silence is their weapon. When the audio ended, the house felt impossibly still. The soft rain had turned into a steady patter, blurring the view through the window. I sat motionless for another minute, memorizing his voice, imprinting it into the walls of my mind. Then, I saved the file twice, one on a backup drive, another in the cloud. Then I picked up the phone. Danica didn't answer right away, so I sent her the recording with a message. It's all here. They moved first. Now it's my turn. I barely put the phone down when it buzzed again. Leah. Video call. I found it, she said, holding up a photo. A faded receipt. Thomas sent this to me in 2021. Property tax payment for the cabin. Signed by Richard. But I never authorized that, I said. I know. And look, he didn't just sign your name. He used your old signature. From before you hyphenated it with Thomas's. I swallowed hard. That detail? It was deliberate. Proof they'd forged paperwork using outdated records. Meticulous, premeditated theft. Celeste texted me, next boarding school rumors are back. Thought you'd want to know. My grip tightened. I opened the drawer again and pulled out the binder. Tabs labeled Cabin Bank Statements Correspondence. My pulse beat harder with each section. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about being erased from my own life. From Sophie's. From the legacy Thomas tried to protect. I flipped open the folder marked Property Title Transfers, 2019, and saw it a title deed to the cabin. Thomas's and my name printed clearly, followed by a footnote. Amendment filed. Contested signature pending verification. A copy of my forged signature was attached in the corner. This was it. The paper trail he tried to preserve. The motive. The pattern. The strategy. I felt no tears. Only clarity. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the dark room, to the ghost of the man who tried to shield me, even from beyond the grave, not anymore. I opened a file labeled Property Title Transfers, 2019, 10 days. That's how long I had before they made their move. I decided to make mine first. The hallway outside the family court clerk's office smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of place where futures were refiled behind doors labeled guardianship or conservatorship. Danica stood beside me, her lips pressed tight around a takeaway coffee cup she hadn't touched. Her eyes scanned the docket, then she nodded once. October 17th. That's when they're bringing the guardianship petition forward. I blinked. That's only 10 days from now. Exactly. And if it passes uncontested, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. My name, my child, my rights, all of it could vanish into the legal gray areas they were so good at exploiting. I exhaled slowly, forcing my thoughts into motion instead of panic. We walked back to her office in silence. I set my bag down and pulled out a manila folder, one I'd started labeling at midnight the night before, in Sharpie block letters, Counter-Strike. Inside copies of Thomas's file, the forged deed tax receipts Leah had scanned, and the USB containing the audio. I laid them out on her table like a war map. They want guardianship. Let's make sure the court sees who they really are first, I said. Danica raised a brow. What's your angle, property fraud? I replied. If we can show a pattern of forged transfers, misappropriation of estate assets, and predatory pressure, then they're not just bad actors, Danica murmured. They're a financial threat to a minor. Exactly. And that puts the judge in a very different position. She tapped her pen against her notepad, then nodded. Okay, I'll file a notice of opposition, but we need evidence logged officially. County records. I've got forms ready, I said, handing her the title verification requests. I'm mailing them today. Danica gave me a long look, part caution, part respect. You really don't plan to flinch, do you know? And not just for me. For Sophie. By late afternoon, I was back in my kitchen, the table buried beneath old appraisals, appraisal reviews, and annotated timelines. Celeste came in, with sleeves rolled, holding 2 coffees and a red pen between her teeth. She set one drink down in front of me. Ready to chase ghosts through bureaucracy, she asked. I've been living with their shadows long enough. We started with 2019, the year Richard made his first attempt to consolidate assets. It was in the margins of appraisal letters that we found the mismatched signatures, valuation gaps, a property reclassified as primary residence, even though I was living across town with Thomas at the time. Celeste narrowed her eyes. You think this ties back to when they tried to move your name off the trust? Back then, I know it does. My phone buzzed. A text from Leah found another email from Thomas. He mentions a mortgage pullback in Jessica's name without consent. Could be worth digging. I saved the screenshot and added it to the binder. Later that night, Sophie returned from her after-school art club. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her ponytail uneven. She glanced at the kitchen table and asked, Are you doing homework? In a way, I smiled, just making sure everything's in the right place. She hesitated, fiddling with the sleeve of her hoodie. Grandma said, I'd be happier living with people who aren't sad all the time. It took everything in me not to react. What do you think I don't know? She says you cry when I'm not looking, that sometimes love is too heavy for little girls. I knelt in front of her, taking her hands. I cry because I love deeply, not because you're too much. Her eyes filled and she nodded once before retreating to her room. Danica called just before 10. I reviewed the forged deed, she said. The signature is a copy-paste from a 2017 form. You never even used that version. Past your name change. Exactly. And the notary listed? She paused. She died in 2020. My blood chilled. You were right, Danica said. This isn't just suspicious. It's coordinated. The room pulsed with quiet energy. Rain danced against the windows again, like it had the night before. I felt Thomas in that rhythm, in the strategy we were building together even now. Danica's voice returned, calm, focused. If this is what I think it is, we won't wait 10 days, we'll strike in 3. They wore pearls and pity like armor. I brought facts. The courthouse felt colder than I expected. Not in temperature, just in tone. The beige walls, the quiet clicks of heels on the tiled floor, the distant hum of overhead lights. This wasn't where truth lived. It was where performances unfolded. And today, I wasn't the only one rehearsed. Danica and I arrived 15 minutes early. She moved with effortless purpose, heels echoing against linoleum papers, tucked in a leather folder like she was cradling weapons. I kept pace beside her, clutching a smaller file copies of Thomas's transcript, the forged deed, and the title request we just received. My hands trembled, but not from fear. Adrenaline, maybe. Or anger finally finding direction. They'll come soft, Danica said. Polite, emotional. It's strategy. They've never cried for me before. I muttered. But I guess there's a first time for everything. When we entered the hearing room, I saw them lined up like a curated display. Richard in a sharp gray suit leaning heavily on his cane, not for support but for sympathy. Margot wore a string of pearls and a pastel cardigan. Her makeup was minimal, except for the eyes which glistened as though on cue. And Jessica seated perfectly straight tissues, already curled in her hand as if she'd rehearsed exactly when to sniffle. There was no jury, no audience. Just one judge seated at the far end, flanked by an aide with a laptop and a small recorder blinking red. Sophie was waiting outside with a court assistant. I hated that she was here at all. Let's begin, the judge said, her tone clipped. This is a preliminary hearing regarding a guardianship petition filed by Mr. Richard Caldwell, citing emotional instability of the biological mother, Elise Caldwell, following the death of her spouse. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. But inside something surged. Richard stood, voice soft. Your Honor, I come before you not in judgment, but in concern. My granddaughter has experienced a loss no child should bear. And while Elise is doing her best, grief can cloud judgment. We only want to offer support, Margot chimed in. It's not about taking Sophie. We just want what's best for her. Stability. Jessica leaned forward, wiping her eyes. She cries every night. She told me she feels trapped. We're not trying to hurt Elise. We're just trying to help. Danica stood, calm, sharp. Help, Your Honor, is not what this family has offered. What they've offered is a legal ambush under the guise of concern. May I submit evidence? The judge nodded. Danica approached the desk with steady hands. This is a deed transfer document from 2019, allegedly signed by Ms. Caldwell relinquishing property rights. Except she flipped a page, this signature doesn't match her tax filings or her passport. The notary listed passed away before this date. And the property recently transferred into a family trust run by Mr. Caldwell. A flicker in the judge's eyes. Danica continued. Furthermore, we have an audio transcript from the deceased Thomas Reeves warning against posthumous coercion. In his words, she looked at me. I stood unfolding the paper, voice shaking but firm. If you want to know who betrayed me, follow the signatures. The silence was immediate and heavy. Jessica dropped the tissue. Richard's expression tightened lips, forming a near smile as if amused by my performance. Margot turned away. Danica added, we also have reason to believe financial abuse occurred prior to Mr. Reeves's death. We are requesting a halt to any custody changes until these allegations are fully investigated. The judge folded her hands. Given the documentation, I'm placing a pause on the guardianship petition. No further motions will be entertained until an inquiry is complete. Ms. Caldwell retains full legal custody. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was air clean, honest air for the first time in months. Outside the courtroom, I spotted Sophie across the hallway, holding a juice box. She looked at me with tired eyes, unsure who to trust. Jessica passed by heels, clacking like a ticking clock. She leaned in, close perfume, suffocating. You think this makes you noble? You're just digging your own grave. Buried under years of wrapping paper and lies, I found a truth they didn't expect me to survive. Leah's attic was exactly as I remembered it, stale with mothballs stacked high with forgotten birthdays and decaying tinsel. I stood at the top of the stairs, the flashlight beam shaking slightly in my hand. A storm rumbled in the distance, rain tracing long fingers down the attic window like a warning. Leah joined me. A moment later, her voice soft but purposeful. It's behind the green trunk, the one with the 96 Christmas tags, still stuck to the side. I didn't have to ask what it was. We both knew. I shoved aside a stack of plush reindeer, then reached into the shadows. A brown box sat nestled beneath layers of wrapping paper and duct-tape nostalgia. Dust blanketed it like snow. A name was written across the top in Thomas's familiar scrawl for Elise. Only if she asks. My breath caught. We carried it down in silence. Leah made tea, but neither of us touched it. I sat on her threadbare couch, the box in my lap. My fingers trembled as I opened it, peeling the tape with surgical care. Inside a manila folder filled with letters. Real paper faded ink. I knew that handwriting anywhere. Thomas's looping, impatient script. Leah leaned over. Are those? They're to Richard, I said, voice tight. Not me. I read them slowly. The words burned. Richard, stop, pressuring Elise about the lake cabin. It's not yours to manage. If you ever try to coerce her again, I'll burn every deal you've hidden. You're not as untouchable as you think. Leah's eyes widened. Jesus. There was more, a second envelope marked Sophie. Trust Revision 2019. Inside bank printouts showing deposits and signatures. But one stood out. A digital receipt signed E. Caldwell, though I had no memory of ever signing it. Beneath the papers sat a black velvet pouch. I drew it out slowly, my pulse thudding like a drum. A thumb drive, labeled for Elise. Only when you're ready. Leah reached for my hand. You don't have to do this alone. I nodded, but gently pulled away. I think I do. Back at home, I closed the blinds. I didn't even remove my coat. The laptop flickered to life, and I slid the drive in. A video appeared, and there he was. Thomas. His face was thinner, eyes tired, but still him. Still mine. "If you're watching this," he began. Then I was right to worry. He paused as if considering how much truth I could handle. Then he continued, "I know how your father works. And Jessica? She's not much better." They started talking about shifting Sophie's trust fund into a family-controlled entity behind your back. Said you were too emotional to manage assets. I stalled them, quietly. But I knew they wouldn't stop. I leaned closer, every muscle in my body tight. "I left you breadcrumbs," he said. "Copies of every title transfer notes in Leah's hands, even a backup will. I know you hate secrets, but this one might save you." He took a breath. The camera flickered. "It's not about vengeance," he said softer now. "It's about protecting what you built. What we built. Sophie. Your name. Your peace." The screen froze on his face. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just stared at the man who saw the storm before it hit, who tried to anchor me from beyond the grave. Celeste called. I didn't pick up. Danica's message arrived. "That thumb drive changes everything. Lock the trust. Now." I copied the files onto my encrypted folder. Then, without flinching, I deleted the original from the drive. No more backups. No more insurance. Now, it's just me and the truth. Some families leave behind recipes. Mine left me forged documents and court subpoenas. The morning began not with coffee, but with the crisp snap of a legal file folder being opened. I stood inside the county records office, hands trembling just slightly as Danica laid out the official complaint papers like a deck of sharp-edged cards. Fluorescent lights flickered above us, humming as if aware of the weight we carried. "This will make it real," she said. "Once you sign, it's no longer preparation. It's war." I nodded. The pen in my hand felt heavier than it should have, like it knew I wasn't just signing paper but challenging bloodlines and legacy. With a stroke of ink, I filed fraud charges against Richard Caldwell and Margot Caldwell for misappropriating my late husband's estate and falsifying real estate documents. The signature landed with finality. Danica didn't pause. Next motion to freeze Sophie's trust until we establish who's been accessing it. She pointed to another form. "We're also requesting a reversal of the 2019 deed transfer on the lake cabin, on grounds of forgery." Outside autumn leaves gathered in drifts against courthouse steps. They reminded me of things swept aside too long. By noon, the filings were in. The clerk barely blinked as she stamped the documents. It was all procedure to her. To me, it was my line in the sand. Later, back at Danica's office, I stood near the window as she spoke with the court liaison. "Yes, both motions. No, she's not backing down." She glanced at me, nodding as if to say, "You're doing it. Keep going." I looked out over the city. The sky had that silver-gray hue that never committed to rain. It felt like everything was holding its breath. The courthouse hallway echoed under my boots. That's where I saw Margot. She stepped out of the elevator like someone exiting a spa perfect hair neutral scarf beige coat. But her eyes, they hardened the second they landed on me. "Did you really think airing dirty laundry would make you righteous?" she hissed, low enough not to draw attention but sharp enough to pierce. I held her gaze. "I think it makes me honest." Margot's mouth curled. "You're dangerous." "For people with something to hide," I replied and walked away. I didn't see Richard until I was nearly at the exit. He was seated in a quiet alcove staring at his phone. When he noticed me, he quickly turned and walked the other direction. "Cowardice has a scent. It smells like expensive cologne masking sweat." I didn't sleep the night before. The documents sat on the dining table like coiled snakes daring me to look away. I spent hours reviewing every signature, every paragraph of legalese that once felt like a foreign language but now read like confessions. Sophie was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm below. I had to keep it that way. For now, while I prepared my statement, I kept thinking of all the years I'd stayed silent, the missed chances, the moments when I swallowed my doubt because I didn't want to believe my own parents were capable of betrayal But silence doesn't make evil disappear, it feeds it. At Danica's office, she brought out a printout of a transaction, one showing Margot's withdrawal from Sophie's fund. For boarding school consultation, it read, a school Sophie had never visited. A lie documented in neat rows and dates. This shows intent, Danica said, tapping the column. You're not overreacting. You're responding. We gathered copies of the alternate will. Thomas had left the one where he made clear the lake cabin belonged to me and Sophie. We attached the video transcript. The judge wouldn't see the emotion in Thomas's eyes, but they'd read his words. Outside the courthouse, protesters for an unrelated case chanted in the background. Their noise bled into my nerves, rattling inside my ribs. But I walked in anyway. Every door I opened felt heavier than the last. Every hallway, a gauntlet. Margot's voice lingered with me long after she'd walked away. Dangerous. Maybe I was. Dangerous to the story they'd curated, the narrative where I was a side character in my own life. That script was burning now. Richard's retreat didn't surprise me. He always preferred the shadows. Let Jessica throw tantrums. Let Margot polish their lies. He was the architect. And now, the foundation was cracking. I checked my phone again. No word from the court clerk yet. But I knew it was coming. When I got home, I found Sophie's sketchpad on the couch. She'd drawn our cabin, the one they tried to take. In her drawing, there were flowers on the porch lights in the window and two people inside me and her. I cried not out of sadness, but from the weight of purpose. The email arrived at 6:04 p.m. Subject hearing scheduled. Caldwell versus Caldwell. I stared at the screen for a full minute before exhaling. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to gather every document, every ounce of courage, every scar turned into evidence. This wasn't just a hearing. It was the reckoning they never thought I'd bring. Let the record show I'm done being quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my evidence. The courtroom felt colder than it should have been. Pale wood panels lined the walls, a subtle echo bouncing beneath the high ceilings. I adjusted the sleeve of my blazer and reminded myself this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every silent manipulation, every forged document, every time they said I was imagining things. Danica stood beside me with practiced poise, her voice steady as she addressed Judge Thompson. Your Honor, the petitioner submits exhibit a certified copies of property title transfers from 2019. The signature allegedly belonging to Mrs. Elise Reeves does not match any of her authenticated legal documents. I watched Richard shift in his chair. He tried to look bored, but the muscle in his jaw gave him away. We also submit Exhibit B. Danica continued a video statement from the late Thomas Reeves explicitly addressing potential coercion and financial misconduct regarding his estate. The judge leaned forward slightly. Proceed. I took a breath, then another, and stood. The first time I noticed something off I began wasn't when the cabin paperwork vanished. It was when my daughter began repeating things no 8-year-old should have to say. Grandma says you're too emotional. Grandpa says this house is wasted on just 2 people. I turned toward the bench, my fingers pressing the edge of the podium. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to erase my rights. They were trying to erase my story. Jessica scoffed. Oh, please, Ms. Caldwell. The judge snapped, you are not recognized at this time. Jessica slumped back, but not before shooting me a glare that could have peeled paint off the wall. Danica handed me the letter, the one Thomas had marked. Only if they force her. I read aloud. If you're reading this, Elise, then they've begun. You must stand firm. They love their legacy more than their blood. They won't stop, but neither should you. Margot dabbed her eyes. Your Honor, if I may. Elise has been unwell. Her grief has clouded. I'm grieving my husband, not my sanity, I said sharply. Don't mistake my silence for instability. Judge Thompson tapped her pen against the desk, looking from one face to another. This court finds that there is credible evidence suggesting potential financial fraud involving the deceased's estate. Until a full review is completed, all Caldwell-held assets are to be frozen. Jessica gasped. Richard stood but said nothing. Margot closed her eyes as if in prayer, but no divine force would undo what I had just set in motion. Court adjourned. As I sat back down, a heaviness settled over my chest, not from fear, but from the gravity of what had just begun. Every eye in the courtroom seemed to linger on me a second too long, as if they too had finally recognized I was no longer the grieving widow sitting in the corner. I was a threat to the version of reality my family had crafted for decades. Margot reached for her pearls, fingering them with quiet desperation. She leaned toward the judge, her voice trembling in practiced concern. "Your Honor, I only ask that you consider Elise's emotional condition. She's endured so much, perhaps more than she realizes." Danica didn't let that stand. And she's standing before you today with composure, clarity, and evidence. That's more than we can say for the defendants. Judge Thompson didn't speak immediately. She observed us all with an expression honed from years of watching family after family unravel under oath. Finally, she leaned forward. "This court will proceed with extreme caution. Allegations of this nature cut deeper than paper. They divide blood." The room stilled. Even the court reporter paused, blinking at the weight of those words. Jessica, not one to accept defeat, gracefully muttered, "This isn't over." No, it wasn't. Not for any of us. Outside, as I tightened the scarf around my neck, I noticed how the air itself seemed to resist movement, as if the town held its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. The woman in the gray coat stood a few paces away, her gloved hands gripping a leather satchel. She didn't look like a lawyer. Too careful. Too familiar. "My name's Nora," she said, eyes scanning my face. "I used to handle your father's travel accounts before things got complicated." I hesitated. "And why come to me now?" "Because I know where some of the money went. And I think your father's been hiding more than deeds." A gust of wind stirred the fallen leaves at our feet. I didn't flinch this time. "Then, you better start talking." Elise sat across from Calvin Monroe in a corner booth of the Rainwater Diner where the vinyl cracked and the coffee came black by default. Rain tapped steadily against the window like fingers counting down. He hadn't touched his mug. Neither had she. Between them on the table lay a flash drive and a folded paper napkin, already wrinkled from his nervous hands. "You said you used to work for my father," Elise prompted gently. Calvin nodded. 3 years. I was internal controls manager. Mostly bookkeeping audits, but starting in 2020, things changed. Richard started pushing transactions through entities that didn't exist a year before. He said it was restructuring. Said it wasn't my job to question, just to balance the books. Elise waited. "I shredded a lot," he admitted, "but not everything. I saved a copy of one memo, just in case." His hand trembled as he reached into his coat and produced a folded page, placing it face down on the table. "I never meant to use it." She turned it over slowly. A printed memo dated August 14th, 2020. The Caldwell Trust letterhead. A signature she recognized immediately. Richard Caldwell. Her eyes skimmed the line's reallocation of assets from Sophie Reeves's trust account to an entity listed as operating liquidity. Non-disclosed. She blinked, stunned by the cold formality of it all. Her daughter's future siphoned like a routine budget move. "Thomas suspected," Calvin whispered. "He came to me, said if anything ever happened to him, you'd need help. He said, she's not the kind to scream, but she'll move heaven if you hand her a shovel." Elise felt her throat tighten. "And you waited this long to speak?" Calvin's face twisted with shame. "I have a family. A mortgage. Your father made sure everyone knew what silence was worth and what defiance cost." She stared at the man, weighing his cowardice against the evidence he offered. "So why now?" "Because I heard what happened in court last week," he said. "And I saw your face on the news. You weren't backing down. And I realized, maybe I don't have to live with this weight." He nudged the flash drive closer. "This has the backup files. Transaction logs, audio recordings of internal meetings. I didn't delete everything, Elise. I just buried it." She didn't touch it yet. Instead, She snapped a photo of the memo and sent it to Celeste. Seconds later, these numbers match what we suspected. It's real. Elise called Danica and placed her phone on speaker. "Tell her," she said to Calvin. Danica's voice came through steady, precise. "What am I hearing?" Calvin spoke shakier now. "I'm Calvin Monroe, former controls officer. I have documentation of Richard Caldwell approving unauthorized withdrawals from his granddaughter's trust. I'm sending Elise the complete records flash drive and hard copy backup." Danica exhaled sharply. "Elise, if what he's saying holds up, this isn't just leverage, it's a weapon. This memo alone proves knowledge and intent. If the recordings align, this could close the case." Calvin's shoulders slumped. "I don't want this traced back to me." Elise's expression darkened. "You don't get to disappear now. You protected him when it mattered most, when I needed someone to stand up. Now that it's safe, you want to play the hero without the consequences." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "But I'm here now." "That's not enough," Elise replied coldly. "But I'll take the evidence." She slipped the flash drive into her coat pocket, its weight sharper than expected. Calvin's gaze dropped to the table, his hands clenched together. "I hope your daughter never learns what silence costs," Elise added, rising from her seat. He didn't respond. Outside, the rain had thickened into a veil, soft but relentless. Elise stepped beneath the overhang and dialed Danica again. "I'm driving the drive over now," she said. "You'll have it in 30. Inside her car, she stared at the steering wheel, then opened her laptop. She inserted the drive. The screen flickered, folders, spreadsheets, PDFs, even a few audio files labeled with dates and cryptic titles. One caught her eye. "Trust transfer sur conf call aug 2020 de WAV." She pressed play. Her father's voice filled the speakers. "It's not illegal if we move fast. The kid's 8, she won't know what's missing." Elise clenched her jaw. Another file. Another scar. She attached everything into an email. No pleasantries. Just one subject line: final weapon. She clicked send. And then, alone in the idling car, with the rain hammering the roof and the hum of justice starting to stir, Elise let herself breathe. Not cry. Not yet. Just breathe. The world outside hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She wasn't chasing justice anymore. She was delivering it. They taught me loyalty. Then they made me choose between it and justice. The morning the story broke, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't need to. My phone lit up like it was on fire, buzz after buzz, messages pouring in from names I hadn't heard in years, from numbers I didn't recognize. But it was Leah's voice memo I listened to first. "It's out. All of it. Channel 7's running it with your name redacted. But everyone will know. They'll know." I sat at the edge of the kitchen table, coffee gone cold beside me, staring at the morning light refracted through the window. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt still, like something long dead had finally been buried properly. At the courthouse, I didn't need to say a word. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras, flashing voices calling my name, but I kept walking. Danica met me just inside the lobby. Her eyes narrowed, jaw set. We expected pushback. What we didn't expect was how fast the public would turn. Jessica arrived without Richard or Margot. Her makeup was flawless, but her body language betrayed the tremble in her step. She didn't look at me directly, only flicked her gaze toward Danica's folder. "Enjoy your show," she muttered under her breath. Inside the courtroom, murmurs passed like wind in a wheat field. Someone whispered, "That's her, the one who exposed her own family," as if I had set the fire instead of just pulling back the curtain on what had been smoldering for years. Danica filed the petition for full custody recognition and immediate asset protection, citing breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. The judge didn't argue. He simply nodded and set a date. Later that day back home, I found Sophie cross-legged in the hallway, playing with a toy she hadn't touched in months. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" she asked. I smiled. "Absolutely." By evening, I was back in front of the TV, not for the news, but for the silence that followed. Outside, dusk rolled in slow and golden. Inside, it was just me, and the shadows of everything that used to hold me down. The collapse wasn't loud. Jessica stormed out of the Caldwell estate. Leah caught it on her phone. "You let it rot," she screamed at Margot. "You thought no one would ever question you. Look where we are now." A door slammed. It echoed even through Leah's shaky recording. By noon the next day, Richard's law firm released a statement: Mr. Caldwell will no longer serve on the board due to unresolved ethical conflicts. No apology, no admission, just a severed tie and a carefully crafted void. Margot refused to leave the house. Neighbors said the blinds stayed shut for 3 days straight. She declined interviews, declined statements, declined reality itself. I heard through Leah that Jessica moved into a hotel. Leah texted me, "That was the cleanest takedown I've ever seen." I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen trying to feel something like satisfaction. But all I felt was the ache of years lost to silence. That night, I washed dishes by hand. Thomas always said it was therapeutic. I could almost hear him humming in the background. The smell of dish soap, the warm water, the rhythm of clean and rinse. It steadied me. My phone buzzed again. A new number. "This is the clerk for Judge Thompson. Final ruling will be delivered next week." I looked out the window. Snow had started falling soft, soundless. The kind of snow that doesn't announce itself, just settles. I stood there for a long time, watching the white blur the edges of the lawn. No fanfare, no applause, just clarity. I whispered, "Let it fall. I'm still standing." And this time, I meant it. You can't rebuild with ashes, but you can plant something in them. The lake was still that morning, its surface like glass, as if the world itself had paused to exhale. I stood under the gray sky with a folded photo in one hand and a small bouquet of thistle and rosemary in the other. Thomas's grave sat quietly beneath the oak tree, the new stone engraved simply husband, builder, guardian. I knelt and placed the photo beside the headstone. Sophie had drawn it herself, crayon lines, hearts, and our names written in block letters. Me and Mom and nobody else. A child's truth in its purest form. "I think you'd be proud," I said quietly. "And if you're not, well, I'm still doing it." That was the beginning. Later that afternoon, I sat in the cabin's den, the crackle of the fireplace behind me, and a thick envelope from Danica open on the table. My pen hovered only a moment before I signed. The new paperwork reinstated Sophie's full inheritance rights. Every clause Richard had slipped in was stripped out, every line reviewed and cleared. It didn't feel like paperwork, it felt like a fortress. A knock at the door. Leah stepped inside, holding a folder. "You sure about this?" she asked. "I'm not in the business of sure," I said. "Just ready?" Together, we drove into town and opened the scholarship account at the local credit union. The Thomas Caldwell Memorial Fund, Leah said to the teller, her voice cracking mid-sentence. "For girls who never got the second chances we did." The teller smiled. "That's beautiful." Leah chuckled through a sniffle. "He hated attention." "You know he'll survive this one," I said, managing a smile. Celeste called that evening, her voice full of energy. "You free on Saturday? We're hosting a panel on financial literacy for women, working moms, divorcees, widows. Basically warriors in disguise." "I'm not a public speaker," I said, half laughing. "You're not speaking," she said. "You're telling your story." I didn't say yes, but I didn't hang up either. The idea lingered like the scent of coffee in the air, warm, persistent. Upstairs, I peeked in on Sophie. She was sketching again, tongue between her lips in fierce concentration. "What's this one?" I asked. She turned the paper. A house stood tall in the background, 3 stick figures in front. This time, she'd drawn a dog too. "It's us," she said. "But no more bad guys. Simple. Whole." Before bed, I lit a candle by the porch and sat in the rocking chair. Thomas had sanded himself. The envelope from the courthouse was already on my lap. No fear, no trembling. I opened it. In the matter of Caldwell vs. Reeves, full dismissal. Rights reinstated. The stars above the lake blinked into view one by one, and for the first time in months, I let my shoulders relax. The war was nearly over, but the healing now that could finally begin, They once erased me with silence. I answered with a signature. The sky had just begun to warm, with the first hint of sunrise streaks of gold and pink blooming across the lake like a slow exhale. The porch boards beneath my feet still held the chill of night. A mug of coffee steamed in my hands, steady and warm, unlike the tremble that had lived in them just months ago. My journal sat open on my lap, the paper cream-colored and forgiving. I didn't pause before writing this time. No second-guessing, no redrafting. Just the quiet rhythm of ink against the page as I began. Dear Thomas, I didn't fight for the house. I fought for your truth. The words poured out like water, finally breaking past a dam. I wrote of everything. Not for the courts, not for the family, not even for Sophie, but for me. For us. The silence they gave me after your funeral wasn't just absence, it was erasure. Every word I wrote now was a reclamation, a resistance, a resurrection. I looked up as the lake shimmered. A light breeze stirred the oak branches, and in their rustling I heard echoes, not ghosts, not grief, but continuity. I'd planted nothing that day but the seed of my own beginning, and now it was time to bury the end. The tin box was old, the kind you'd use to keep fishing lures and odd screws. I lined it with the note I'd written, a photo of you and Sophie at the pumpkin patch, and the red ribbon from that birthday gift you wrapped when you thought I'd forgotten the date. I hadn't. I just hadn't known how to receive joy back then. I stood cradling the box against my chest and walked barefoot across the dew-kissed grass. Under the oak tree where the roots had begun to twist and bulge with time, I knelt. The earth gave easily. When I placed the box inside and covered it again, I whispered, "Stay here, but not with pain." Back on the porch, I dusted my knees and sat again this time, with nothing but the last sip of coffee and the sound of birds starting their day. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from Celeste Thanksgiving's at mine. "You coming?" I didn't hesitate. I replied, "Already home." Behind me, the screen door creaked, then the thudding of small feet. Sophie's laughter rang out as she dashed barefoot across the planks. "It's cold!" she shrieked, but she was smiling, arms outstretched like wings. I caught her mid-run and pulled her into a hug. The sound of her joy settled into my chest like a song I hadn't heard in years. Inside, Derek's voice called out, "You two coming in, or should I start breakfast without you?" Sophie grinned, "Only if you make the apple pancakes." I nodded at her, watching her race back through the door, and then I turned once more to the journal on my lap. Carefully, I closed it. The red ribbon lay beside me, and I tied it around the worn leather cover, one last gesture of reverence. Not just for you, Thomas, but for what we built, what I was still building. No gavel, no press release, no dramatic declarations, just this, a woman no longer silenced, a story no longer stolen, a name no longer forgotten. This time, no one will forget my name. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If my story stirred something in you, rage, sadness, hope, I ask you to remember this silence is never neutrality. When others erased my name, I chose not to scream, but to write, to stand, to act. If you've ever felt unseen, know that dignity doesn't require an audience, it just needs truth. Comment if you've ever had to walk away from those who claim to love you. Share your strength. And if life hands you betrayal, don't beg for fairness. Build your own justice, quietly, powerfully, and make sure they remember your name.